You're having that personal bond and connection, and you know you're making a difference for somebody else's life. To be honest, between the two of us, I think I was the one who got the best deal.
We could learn from each other a little more than what we're doing at the moment.
I think so. You cannot hear a thing. It is as quiet and as serene. You're just sitting there and you're looking down on planet Earth all by yourself in your little cockpit and just enjoying this complete, isolated, unique experience.
Your career is filled with risks. How do you manage that?
Zoom in. You can't do everything at all times. But wherever you decide to pull down, this is really what I'm passionate about. This is really what I want to do. Go with that. And then stop talking about it. Get on with it. Execute, 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 execute.
In this episode, from jungle to Mount Everest, Per shares some of the most crazy stories we've ever heard.
Not to mention sharing with us the Wimmer Values, which have provided the foundation for all the success that he's had as an entrepreneur and philanthropist today. Enjoy. Welcome for another show of Growing For It. We're your hosts, Mick and Trav, and today we're here with Per Wimmer. And Per, you're a businessman, entrepreneur, adventurer, philanthropist, astronaut, a lot of pretty exciting words to describe who you are and what you've done throughout your life. I even found some place where you've been described as the real-life Indiana Jones meets James Bond 007. And I think for me, I would also like to add Maverick from Top Gun and maybe Clint Eastwood from Space Cowboys to that to that list as well. But either way, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on with us today. Welcome.
Same indeed. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop talking from now. We'll leave it with that.
That's a good promo, right?
That's a good promo. There we are. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Pat, can we just get started? Can you just give a little intro to who you are, where you come from, and what are you up to these days?
I think you summarized it quite well. I am a financier, global financier. That's my background. Although I was trained as a lawyer originally, I've got 3 law degrees, as it so turned out, and later did political science and finally did finance, international relations and business. So I got 4 masters by way of education. So I've always been very curious about learning and sort of been driven from deep inside about learning one way or another, whether it's through the university of life, as I would call it, in a broader sense, meaning, through travels and adventure and that, has taken me into very exciting, sometimes challenging places, and eventually will take me to space. So that's very exciting. Or whether it's within the formal settings of university and education, etc. But that's always been a key driver for me. But whatever I've been up to, whatever I wanted to do. I'm also an adventurer, as described. I've done many exciting things on planet Earth before going. I guess my claim to fame to date was in 2008, I became the first person on Earth to successfully do a tandem skydive above Mount Everest.
Amazing.
So that was pretty wild, to be honest. Yeah. I'm sure we can talk more about that. And then obviously space, I'm a future astronaut. I was due to fly this summer, but it's now going to be 2 years out. We're waiting for the Delta rocket to be built. Once that's built, I fly. So I'll see you in space at that point.
Amazing.
So it's going to be quite exciting.
That's where we'll have our next episode from.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We'll have a live link.
Live link.
Exactly. I'm a philanthropist. I've done a lot of work for charities. I think it's very important, both for me as a person, but also think it's important to, and my duty, to give back one way or another, and in particular give back to the children of the future. So I've done a lot of charity work, speaking at schools. We've made donations, supported various children charities. When we did Everest, we supported 2 charities, UNICEF and Global Angels, where we help orphanages in Nepal. And some of these kids who were in a challenging position, we ended up funding their orphanages for 5 years. So, at least we made a small contribution there to their lives and allowing them to live out their dreams just as we were living out our dreams, crazy as they are. Beyond that, I'm an author. I write books. I've just put out my 4th book, which is my autobiography, Volume 1. It's called The Sky Is No Limit.
Love that.
Quite appropriate. Yeah. It was quite an exciting journey to write that one. I'm always looking ahead. What's the next project? What's the next initiative? What's the next thing, we can do? Or some people might approach me, we'll talk about, I've got an idea. What do you think? Should we do a joint venture on this? Or what do you think? Or can we collaborate on this thing? And a lot of times I say no, just because of bandwidth and, there's only so much capacity you have. But if it's a great idea, then you want to do it. You want to get on with it, etc. But writing your autobiography, you have to look back. So that was a big challenge for me, sort of to actually go back. But it's a wonderful journey, to be honest. And looking back and seeing, where life started and the various steps and decision making along the way was actually quite interesting exercise, but something I'm not used to doing. So it took a bit of time. I mean, technically it took 18 months to write the first book. We're currently writing the follow-up, the sequel, volume 2, which is going to be called Beyond the Sky.
Oh, okay. So, we see where that's going.
Exactly. But it's been an interesting journey to do that. I've got a great publisher and great people around me, great editor and stuff. So I've got a lot of great feedback from them. I usually write when I fly. So when, for instance, after this, my plan is very much to fly here from Copenhagen back to London, and I will be typing away, flying over there, because when I fly, a lot of times I travel alone, and therefore it's a quiet environment. I can concentrate. There's no mobile phones. I'll be ringing, etc. So I usually write a lot, and it's by no means perfect, but when you write immediately after you have done certain things, whether it's adventures or you have certain thoughts or ideas, etc., put them down on paper. And that will also be my best advice if anybody wants to write a book about something, about their lives. And so get it down on paper as quickly as possible, as soon after or even sometimes before an event, because that's gold dust. It's honestly gold dust. No matter how badly written it is, it doesn't matter, because you get down on paper how hard it was, how cold it was, how difficult it was, and your thoughts, your feelings and all that stuff. And that's very difficult to replicate 5 years later. So that's very important. That's my work. So I'm an author, do philanthropy. I write, and then I do a bit of media work as well. I'm a regular commentator on various news channels whenever there's anything going on about space. I used to do a lot with the BBC, so regular on their programs. Then I switched to Sky, did a lot with them, because I was the only astronaut in Mayfair in W1 in London, meaning therefore I could be available in their studio, in the Westminster studio, within 10 minutes, and there was no other astronauts around. So I sort of cornered that market. So I would often go on that whenever there was something important breaking, or just I needed a commentary about whatever space or moon stuff was happening. These days, in more recent times, I've done a lot with Turkish television, TRT World, because Turkey has just had their first astronaut up there, which is a massive thing in Turkey. So Turkey has gone space mad as a result of that. So anyway, so that's been very exciting to see. But yeah, that's sort of me in a nutshell. But above all, I just live out my dreams. I wake up every morning and, my agenda would be packed with activities from all these sorts of things I've just described. And I don't really make the distinction with it. I just go for it. I've got wonderful colleagues in London that can help me and leverage sort of realizing the dreams. But that's it.
That's great. I can't wait to dig into this story and find more about this.
Thank you.
One thing that kind of stuck with me, just a little piece of when you said philanthropy to actually help these orphanages so that these young children can start living out their dreams already, just as you sort of gotten to do. I'm curious, what early influences did you have in your life going back to your childhood? Was there any significant moments or influences or anything that sort of evolved where you were like, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be an entrepreneur? What pivotal moments could you perhaps share with us to let us know about that?
So there's two questions there. So firstly, on the philanthropic side of things, I think the source of that probably two. Number one, it came from not least my mom. She was working at a school for handicapped adults, and she would always go above and beyond trying to help out these adults. And she will take them on holidays, and she'll do lots of good. So she really has an amazing heart, which I'm very pleased to say, and I'm very proud to say, she was recognized for by Queen Margaret II of Denmark. She got a medal for all her services to charity and for her work. So I'm very proud about that. So it comes from home, the good heart, definitely. Both for my dad and my mom, but particularly my mom in that regard. Secondly, I did spend a fair amount of time in America. I studied there, I worked there. And in America, there's a particularly strong sort of feeling of doing charity or helping out, etc., helping the underprivileged, whatever it might be. Because in particular in America compared to, say, Denmark, there's not the same social safety net as we might be used to here in Scandinavia. Something which actually Obama pointed out. I was together with Obama on Friday, and he pointed that out. He said he actually loved the Scandinavian model as social welfare system, etc. And I think he seeks a lot of inspiration from Scandinavia, and he's been many times to Denmark actually. And I think that is a big difference between parts of the American society and here. But the upside in America is that there's a lot of philanthropy. People really take charity very seriously, make serious donations, and really try to fill those gaps where the system is failing. And I got educated partly over there, and also later worked for an American company, Goldman Sachs. So even at Goldman's, very big global investment bank, profit-seeking, all these sort of things. But even within that, we took out time of our busy life sometimes and did community teamwork, as we called it, i.e. we would go out and help whatever, an old care home or elderly people.
That's pretty cool. That's a story that doesn't get that much attention usually. When you think Goldman Sachs, you're not normally thinking like charity, giving time back necessarily, like as the first thing.
No, exactly. So, and that's something that they don't advertise it a lot, but it was there, very much so. They just did the right thing. So credit due when credit is due. And even when I studied at Harvard in America, we also took time off there and actually did community work, charity work. And I had to roll up my sleeves and use my poor, fine hands there and don't really start digging and doing landscaping and all sorts of things. But I really enjoyed it. So it also came in through my time in America, where charity and philanthropy is so much high on the agenda, whereas we have perhaps a little bit of a tendency in places like Denmark to just be complacent and say, this is actually the state's role. You know, the state gives so much, and which is true, so I don't have to do anything. And I think that's a little bit too much of a release of responsibility. I think we all have to do a little bit in our community. We have to help out a bit, do our little bit. If you don't have to save the world, and it's difficult to save the world, but if you can make a small difference in your community, and if you do the same, and if I do the same, the world is a much better place, let's be honest. Just a little bit and a little bit, a little bit. It actually adds up to a lot in the end. And it's not necessarily you have to write out a big check. It's just being conscious in your mentality about it, helping out, where you can see a need. Because you're more likely to be at the coalface, wherever you live, in your community, and see, oh, maybe we could do something here. And sometimes it's just a thought. It's just being conscious about it. And then maybe bringing in a little bit of resources that doesn't cost you too much. But you'd be silly not to do it. And I think we sometimes are a bit too complacent in Europe to saying we are entitled to whatever we'll be entitled to, and we'll just leave the state to take care of it. That ain't good enough. I do prefer the Scandinavian model as a model of society, because it does help a lot, and I do think a lot of that responsibility resides with the state, perhaps better than, say, in America, where there's a lot of people who fall through the cracks. In particular, when it comes to healthcare, if you have a job in America, you typically would be insured for healthcare purposes by your employer, which is fine, as long as you're working. But the moment you're not working,
and you have to have like a minimum level of job as well. It's not all jobs, so
exactly. You got to have a certain level of job to get that. But if you have that, great. But then you're in a good position, because then you have a good salary and you got healthcare insurance and all that. So life is okay. Problem is, when you lose your job, you suddenly don't have your income, you don't have your healthcare insurance, and yet you still have a private hospital charging an arm and a leg. It's really expensive healthcare. And it's not your fault. So there, I think we could maybe calibrate a bit more towards the Scandinavian model there. But we're by no means perfect here, like I said. No. We all have to step up to the plate. So there's work to be done across the Atlantic in both camps, let's say. So
we could learn from each other a little more than what we're doing at the moment.
I think so. We could certainly learn from the Americans to be even more charitable, to be even more conscious about making an impact locally, financially or otherwise, in your own small way. I think we could do better. If we do better, a little bit better, the world will become a better place. So we can certainly learn from the Americans, and the Americans can certainly learn from the Scandinavians. So, let's try and exchange, and hopefully we'll get into a better place for both sides.
Yeah, that's amazing. I can tell that in doing all of these activities and with that mindset, I'm sure you're a person who has had an impact on many lives, either directly or indirectly. I'm curious, and maybe you've already hinted at the answer to this, but who is the person that's had the biggest impact on your life?
Well, let me first answer, because you said one thing that was very important, and let me just tell you a little anecdote. I remember very distinctly, just before I was heading out to do what was an adventure of a lifetime for me. I was going to skydive Mount Everest for the first time ever. I mean, in humanity, not just for me, but for anybody for that matter.
A real first.
A real first, a true first in the world. I remember that, and I was super excited about it. A bit scared as well, because it's, you're up there at 9,000 meters, minus 55 degrees centigrade. You're up there where the jet streams are, and you're supposed to jump out. It's like, it was a bit crazy. And to be honest, some of the feedback we got from the locals ahead of heading up there was like, you guys are mad. You guys need to see a brain surgeon or something. They were really thinking about it. But anyway, before we went up, I went to visit one of the orphanages. And there was this particular girl I got to sit down in front of. And it was amazing to see. She was an orphan. She was a very eloquent, amazing, you could see beautiful heart, beautiful person who was very keen on working hard, studying. So happens she was so excited and into space and astronomy and things like that. So obviously we had a lot to talk about.
You hit it off.
We hit it off like wildfire. When she realized I was a future astronaut, she was like, "Wow, okay, let's talk." So we had an amazing dialogue. We came from very different sort of parts of the world, different cultures, different conditions, if you like, etc. But we were just at the same frequency all the way, and it was just beautiful. And I tell you what, me sitting there spending real time, quality time, interacting with this other human being who is just, in my opinion, amazing, wanting to live out her dreams, just as I was living out my dreams, and we had that kind of sharing between us. And also in the back of my mind, me realizing that I and my team were making a real impact, a real difference for her life by supporting this particular orphanage and financially and writing a check for the next 5 years, which is a small thing and little detail, whatever, but it's a huge difference to her. It makes a huge difference to her and her life. That felt enormously good. I mean, I felt great. I had a wonderful experience because I was face to face. It's one thing sitting in London and helping a bit and writing a check or whatever. It's a whole different thing when you're literally face to face. You're having that personal bond and connection, and you're making a difference for somebody else's life. It just makes you feel good. So to be honest, between the two of us, I think I was the one who got the best deal because, yes, I helped her, but I felt so blessed and over the moon about it. And yes, she got some support material, financials or whatever that helped her, but I got the best deal, I think, because I was really, really, really happy about it. So those moments,
that's amazing.
Those moments actually inspires me to do more, because you feel so good about it. You feel you're doing the right thing. But more generally, I mean, who are sort of the people I would look up to, and who are the people I've been blessed to got to meet, who have carried a huge degree of inspiration. Let me mention a few. Number one, Buzz Aldrin. Second man on the moon, Apollo 11, who genuinely is a friend. In fact, he wrote the foreword to my book, The Sky Is No Limit, my autobiography. I've spent a lot of time with Buzz, and we've had such a great time together. I've been so inspired by the courage him and Neil and Mike had.
Yeah.
When, as you may remember, it was a space race, and to be honest, they weren't quite ready to launch for the moon, to hit for the moon, to have the moonshot. They were not ready at all. And yet they still put their lives at risk. I mean, the degree of risk these guys took, we sometimes tend to forget.
Yeah. That's like unreal, actually.
It was just unreal.
Yeah.
So that kind of spirit of adventure, that spirit of we gotta hit for the moon, literally, I think that's something that's enormously inspiring, and thinking about what these guys did for humanity and how they helped us push the boundaries how they helped us look beyond sort of the obvious, etc. And in the process took on an enormous amount of risk with their lives, effectively. And it came quite close. You probably remember, just before they landed on the moon, there was that funny error that came up, 1202 error. And they didn't know what 1202 meant, just as they were running out of fuel. You remember, they almost ran out of fuel because they couldn't land where they were supposed to because there was a big crater. So they had to go a bit further, and they were down to like the last 10, 15 seconds of fuel. So it came very close to total disaster. And at the same time, 1202 comes on. It's like, what is 1202? Neil couldn't remember it. Buzz didn't know. And so back at Houston, they kind of had to look it up. Turned out it was computer overload. There was just too much going on. Because don't forget, your iPhone today has got a lot more compuper power than they had on the spaceship. So anyway, but they figured it out and eventually went manual, and they then steered it and obviously landed there very, very carefully. But all these kind of amazing stories and of personal quest for big stuff, the moon in this case, willingness to take risk and getting there, I think is hugely inspirational. And I think right now we are going through an era within private space that is akin to how things were in the late 60s, early 70s with NASA, except now it's just a lot of private companies and everything that's coming in. And people, and here's another source of inspiration, people like Elon Musk, who I've had the good fortune of spending a little bit of time with before he became a rock star. These days, I don't see him that often. Back then, I did. And I also helped a few years ago produce a documentary about Elon Musk, which is on Netflix. It's called Elon Musk, the Real Iron Man, and which is quite appropriate for him, of course, because he is really like that. And so Elon would also be a person I would rate up there as a true 21st century visionary. I mean, just an absolutely incredible person. Yeah. Unique. Yeah. And it's not unique that he's, for most of the time, the wealthiest person on earth. That's just an accident. That's just a coincidental accident.
Yeah.
As a result of his labor.
That's a byproduct.
That's a byproduct. And even for him, if you ask Elon, does he care about it? No. He honestly do not care about it. I mean, Elon, he lives in a dare I say, IKEA flat pack bed. I mean, fairly simple house that is very close to the factory. $50,000 house. I mean, he could afford a bit more. Yeah. And he used to have a bit more, but he sold them all because what's the point? I'm not going to use it. So he lives in a very cheap house. So he doesn't care about the money, only to the extent that the money allows him to execute on his two missions. And what is Elon's two missions? Fundamentally, number one, to save planet Earth, very modest request, and hence why he's building electric cars. I mean, literally, I mean, that's a very good way to start.
Yeah, and all those electric systems and everything as well for cities.
And you got all and solar, solar panels. He had Solar City before he merged into Tesla and stuff. So he's got all of that stuff going on, as well as his technology initiatives with AI and Neuralink and all these stuff. But should we fail in saving the planet Earth, nevertheless, in spite of trying very hard, there is a plan B, and the plan B is to head for Mars. And that's his other sort of quest, hence why he's building the Starship at the moment. Yeah. I mean, he's building it commercially, of course, and guess what? It will be the biggest rocket ever built. The Starship used to have a different name called the BFR, sorry. I'll leave to the audience to guess what that stands for, but it is massive.
Big something rocket.
Big something rocket, exactly. Yeah, it's massive. It's more powerful than the Saturn V that took us to the moon. So absolutely incredible. And yes, there will be commercial applications to that. And yes, SpaceX will make money and revenues on it. But Elon's mission here is obviously to head for Mars and get there and live there and die there, just not on impact, as he famously said.
Wow, so Buzz Aldrin, Elon Musk.
Yeah, and I'll throw into the mix as well a personal friend of mine, Sir Richard Branson. He's somebody I got to know initially just through signing up as a founding astronaut with Virgin Galactic. So the story was...
Yeah, and what does that mean to sign up as a founding astronaut?
So the background of that was that I guess I was the first, if not one of the first Europeans to sign up for private space back in 2000. when nobody was talking about it. And I signed up back then with another company, an American company actually called Space Adventures. And I started my training in Russia. I started flying MiG fighter jets at Mach 3 at 80,000 feet. Literally, so I could see the curvature of the Earth. I could see the darkness of the universe. And I could see the blue skies. I mean, it was just absolutely incredible flying. I mean, it was true Top Gun Russian style, I suppose. It was pretty amazing.
What goes through your mind when you see that for the first time? You're sitting in that seat, going that fast, and seeing the black and seeing the curve.
The blackness of the universe. I mean, well, first and foremost, I can confirm the Earth is round, not flat.
Oh, that's great.
Let's just establish that.
There you go, Trav.
In case anybody doubted it, or there was some fake news floating around, it is round. I've seen it. No, it's actually amazing when you can get into a MiG-25. So I was sitting out in the front, and I had a Russian guy in the back, and obviously when we're on the runway, and you so slowly get going, and then you put on the afterburner, which is pretty cool. So you get an enormous amount of power spitting out and
it's a lot of
flames
thrust.
and stuff like that. It's a lot of thrust, basically. I mean, you're flying on, I think it's 16 tons of fuel or something. It's enormous. It's basically just 2 big jet engines and fuel, and that's it, and a little bit of electronics. Anyway, you get this enormous push as you go up. So a lot of G's pulling you back in the seat. And then you climb up to cruising altitude. And then the G's come off, obviously, as you get up to higher speeds. And eventually we hit Mach 3, so cruising there at 80,000 feet. And the funny thing is, when you're sitting up there at the top of the world at Mach 3, at 80,000 feet, it is as quiet as it's ever been. Why? Because you're cruising at Mach 3. The sound cannot keep up. You're traveling 3 times the speed of sound.
So it's completely silent.
So it's completely silent. You can't hear the engine. You can't hear anything. So you're
thought about that.
Yeah, no,
that's
exactly,
wild.
because it's Mach 3. It's 3 times the speed of sound. So you cannot hear a thing. It is as quiet and as serene. And you're just sitting there and you're looking down on planet Earth all by yourself in your little cockpit, taking pictures. I was filming and taking pictures and just enjoying this complete, isolated, unique experience. Visually unique because I think when you're up there, the sky is just bluer than blue and bluer than you see when you're standing on planet Earth. You're seeing the curvature, which is like, wow, pretty amazing. And the darkness. So it's kind of like night and day at the same time. And you feel like, hold on, this is, how does that work? Night and day at the same time. It's just surreal.
Yeah.
And it's quiet. So you have a lot of time to think and philosophize about the whole thing. So to be honest, it was remarkable sitting up there.
What did go through your mind?
For starters, I just had a hard time grasping. It can't be day and night at the same time. There's something wrong here. At the same time, it was very peaceful and it was very zen in many ways because no noise. And I was just like, wow, this is special. This is really unique. My motivation for going was perhaps a little bit more Tom Cruise, Top Gun. Let's go and get it. Let's go and let's get into a dogfight or something. And
Mr. Adrenaline over there.
Yeah, exactly. Let's do another cool adventure and let's go for it and let's do some dogfighting or something like that. But actually, it was the complete opposite. It was like zen. It was quiet. You were just sitting there on the top of the world, and yeah, it was just surreal. Surreal in many regards. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was very special. And I was doing this at the time, by the way, when Elon was in parallel running around in Russia trying to talk to Roscosmos.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know if you remember.
He was trying to buy rockets from the Russians, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So he had a famously sort of couple of attempts to dialogue. First, he went over there himself and he showed up in his jeans and didn't look particularly sort of corporate or anything, and they kind of laughed at him, and who are you? And then he went back empty-handed, and then he came back over again with another good contact of mine, Jim Cantrell, who today is famous for his Phantom aerospace that he's doing, and Griffin, who later became NASA administrator. So he was well armed. He had some good guys with him this time around, and the guy from Roscosmos famously spat on his shoes, laughing all of them out of the door and stuff like that. So it was not particularly well received, and that then became the catalyst for Elon and Jim. And Jim was quite important in the early days of SpaceX because he kind of recruited a lot of the early peoples and helped significantly in create what became SpaceX at the end of the day. So that whole experience there was really when Elon realized, actually, no, I got to do this myself. I got to do it the hard way and build it up, you know. So he
Another
was
one.
So he was doing that in parallel with me doing some of the early days of space train, being one of the very first private Europeans to kick the tires there. And I went down to see when Dennis Tito took off as the very first private to ever go into space in 2001. So I was literally on his launch pad in Baikonur, Kazakhstan, 10 minutes before he took off. I mean, you could not do this in America. There's no way on earth. I was literally there saying goodbye to him and wishing, hey, have a good flight, safe trip. And then afterwards went back to about 3 miles away, and we saw the Soyuz beautifully taking off and stuff like that. I was so excited for Dennis. I mean, it was like, wow, this has got to be. And NASA, I remember even the days leading up to it, I was staying at Hotel Sputnik down in Baikonur, and I remember NASA was furiously trying to stop him from going. At that point, NASA did not want any private interference or anything like that, but they couldn't stop it because he'd done a deal with the Russians, and it's the International Space Station, not the American Space Station. So there's nothing they could do, and he got to fly. And then later I came back, and I trained in parallel with Mark Shuttleworth, the first African in space. He's from South Africa. And indeed, we did a documentary together with Discovery Channel where he was doing his training, I was doing mine, and there was also the Russian cosmonaut. It was pretty cool in the days because it was very rock and roll. And when you do your space training in Russia, it was very rough and ready.
I could imagine.
It was very old-fashioned. The paint will fall off and whatever. They don't care about that. But I would say this. I have no hesitation flying a Russian rocket. I really trust the Russian scientists a lot. They don't laugh, they don't joke, but they're very good in what they do. I would be fairly scared flying Aeroflot domestically because I wouldn't trust sort of what goes on, and I'm not sure about the safety record is great, but being in the space program, honestly, they were super good, really good. They knew what they were doing, and it was really fun to be part of that for a while before life obviously changed on a more global politics basis. Yeah. So Elon would be one, and then Richard Branson, who obviously his journey is incredible and enormously inspiring. From being a dyslexic entrepreneur who just initially started with his student magazine and then eventually went over into importing records from the Channel Islands because you could trade on a tax advantage, and then eventually got into jail for that, where his mom famously had to come and bail him out, and he got a huge telling off, and she wasn't very impressed by it. Bless her. I mean, Eve, his mom was, she was such a wonderful character. We became really, truly good friends, and we used to dine together every sort of 6-8 weeks in London.
Okay.
So we were hanging out a lot. I mean, we were fellow authors. You know, she was an author and I was an author, so we had a lot in common. And she was just the most amazing human being. So I can see where Richard gets it from, to be honest. She was also the only one I have ever seen Richard take serious orders from.
I could imagine.
When mommy says,
exactly.
This is what you should do, then this is what we should do.
My mom has a special place in everyone's.
In everyone's,
Right.
But you don't think about it when you just see Richard the entrepreneur and stuff, but you forget, well, he actually has a mom too, you know, and she does have opinions, very strong ones, in fact. But bless her, she was such a beautiful soul and amazing character and with the right moral compass and everything else. So Richard was very right to listen to her, to be honest. And through that, obviously I became, close to other parts of the family and Richard. I spent a lot of time at Necker, and we went sailing, and also flew at one point back to Europe with Richard and stuff. So, and he's an amazing person. I mean, he really is, truly. Not only is he amazing for what he's built up and how he understands marketing, how he understands consumer businesses, how to run them in a credible and great way. Hence why he's built up the brand he's built up and the business model he has attached to it, and which financially obviously throw off a bit of cash from time to time. Famously, he's just sold literally a few weeks ago Virgin Money, which was one of the banks he built up in the UK.
Okay.
Sold it for $3 billion and probably cashed in himself about $500 million or something like that. So
that's not a bad deal.
That's not a bad deal. Again, same thing. I mean, he knows how to do it. He knows how to build up businesses. So as an entrepreneur, hats off. He really knows how to run a business. But it's more than that. He's also, as a person, I think he's very charitable. He thinks a lot about issues, important issues in the world, whether it's the environment or it's the oceans or the death penalty or something like that. He fights issues quietly and in front of the camera in a good way. And so I think also he certainly has the right heart and the right intent to do good and try to change the world. And then obviously I love him for the fact he's building my space rocket.
Yeah, exactly.
We share that dream very much. And yes, our relationship technically started by me writing a check to become a founding astronaut with his program. And the story was that I'd started kicking the tires earlier, like in 2000 in Russia. And obviously his people had heard about that or they've seen it in the media. And therefore they called me one day and said, Per, we know who you are. Fancy a drink on us. Yeah. And said, yeah, sure, always up for a drink. And they said, we would like to invite you to become a founding astronaut with Virgin Galactic, which is a new adventure we're putting together. What do you think? So I thought about it very briefly and said, yep, that sounds good. Sign me up.
Must have been a good drink.
It was a very good drink. It wasn't long, but it was good. So I signed up. And then we thought back then we were going to fly in. I mean, at that point, I had 2 missions to space going because I still had the old one from Space Adventures. So I thought I was going to fly in 2006, 2007 or something like that. Then very sadly, Space Adventures was getting delayed. I mean, when it comes to space, 2 things you can always be sure about, by the way. It costs more and takes longer.
Yeah.
That's a given. So keep that in mind. Whatever you get involved in the space, it costs more, it takes longer.
That's like a good entrepreneurship in general. Like
at least for hardware.
Yeah, at least for hardware, definitely. So that's precisely what happened to me. Space Adventure has done a deal with the Russians, and obviously the budget was getting smaller and smaller and thinner, which had the advantage that we could kind of buy our way in to a large degree, and they sorted that out quite beautifully. But it had the disadvantage that obviously the rockets were not coming off the rank as quickly as we would have hoped. And at the same time, with Galactic, we had an accident in 2008, 2009, I think it was. And it was an industrial accident on the ground. It was a very hot day out in Mojave. And I think there was some nitrogen that leaked because it was like super, super hot and et cetera. And then, poof, the whole thing blew up. And 3 people got killed and 3 got seriously injured and stuff. So it was what we call a bad day. But as always, when these things happen, we always, as an astronaut community, get together and the message is very clear. The mission must go on. Yeah. The best way we can honor the fallen is just to keep going. They would have wanted that. Yeah. If anything happened to me, I would want that. I don't want you to stop. Then that's just unfortunate, but you got to keep going. And that was very much sort of the attitude at the time. But it meant obviously delays. And then fast forward till we had the next accident on October 31st, 2014, where we had a rocket test flight on the spaceship that went up. And then for some reason, the test pilot put on the brakes too early.
Okay.
We don't know why. He was a very, very experienced test pilot, but he put it on a bit too early, causing a lot of strain on the frame. And eventually the wing broke off and the whole thing started spinning and it just went terribly. And he actually got killed. And the other test pilot miraculously managed to escape.
Okay.
And land. I mean, he got beaten up pretty badly, but he survived. And he's still with us today. The reason why I know it was October 31st, 2014, so specifically, is that it was also, on a personal note, the day we buried my dad. My dad died on Monday. This was on a Friday. And on the Wednesday that week, there had been a rocket that blew up, a satellite rocket that blew up in America at the launch pad. And I remember I was actually in Copenhagen at the time, and I did a small interview with the Danish TRTV about that rocket blow up. And then on the Friday, when we'd gone through all this emotional draining experience, having to go through the funeral of my dad, who was very important to me, by the time me and my mom, we made it back to the summer house, and literally put our feet up and just relaxed and I said, this was quite a tough day. I get a phone call from another Danish newscaster called TV2, and they said, Per, what do you think about the rocket crash? And my initial reaction to them was, you're a bit, I'll happily comment on it, but you're a bit late with the news. It was on Wednesday. And they're like, no, the one today. And I was like, what do you mean the one today? Well, Galactic, your spaceship is crashed. It's like, what? You've got to be kidding me. and we'd like you to come in and share a few comments on it. And I was like, whoa. And then I Googled it up, and I saw Spaceship Two lying there completely smashed on the ground. I was like, no, gosh, this is just...
How do you personally navigate an experience like that?
I mean,
that sounds about pretty maxed out as far as a human can
emotionally
become.
I was drenched. It was so draining. I mean, the whole week had been super tough for me because obviously it's my dad. It was so emotionally draining. There was nothing left in terms of tears or sadness or whatever. It was just, and then this one just come on top of it. Interestingly enough, and this is kind of paradoxical in a way, my dad always said he didn't really want me to go to space, to be honest. He thought it was a bit of waste of money and stuff. He thought better stay on the ground and do something more sensible. So obviously on his day of the funeral, I mean, obviously there had to be the day that it crashed. So that's a little bit of a coincidence of dates.
Yeah.
But it was just draining. So yeah, I couldn't be punched more in the face by that time. So I had to take some days off the following week, basically. So we've had these setbacks along the way, but the mission has always gone on. And nevertheless, when I made it back to London after all this, obviously the BBC and everybody else wanted to talk, and they were like, where are you? We need to talk to you. We'll come to wherever you are. Just tell us where you are. We'll come. They were like, the global media was coming in hard and fast. And with also a lot of criticism on Richard, because you're putting lives at danger and for what reason and all this stuff. So, and I felt it was very important to go in and defend him and his dreams, because it's a shared dream I have.
Yeah.
So in spite of emotionally that being... I was still in a very bad place. I still felt it was my duty to show up, and I did try to educate sort of the wider audience about, the dream for space must go on. We as humans, we have always lived out our dreams. And the reason why we are such an advanced species compared to all other species on planet Earth, including the apes and monkeys and everything else, is because we have that. We have that in us. We want to learn. We want to do things, make mistakes, correct them, do it again. And that's how we advance as human beings. That's how we push the boundaries. That's how we make technology progress, etc.
Was it that vision that you could grab onto for strength to pull you through in that moment to be honest, to pull yourself together? Like, where does that come from?
No, to be honest, I went a bit mechanical at that time because emotionally I was still not in the right place. It was still tough, but I have enough sort of the show must go on in me in terms of I can switch a bit mechanical and, go autopilot, if you like, in that sense. And just because obviously I very much believe when these things happen, we got to keep going. We got to keep up the dream. And that's important that everybody understands it and hopefully buys into it. So I did that. But it was a tough time, I have to admit. And it took a long time before things sort of settled down and it got a bit normal again. But what a coincidence, the whole thing happens around the same time. So that's certainly a week I won't forget anytime soon.
Yeah, I could imagine that. Just listening to this, it just amazed me with all the stories. There's risk involved in all of it. And it seems like that's what drives you. It's like for average people, life is here. But for Per Wimmer, life has to be up here. Your career is filled with risks. How do you manage that?
So I have what's called the 7 Wimmer fundamental values, which is my driving compass. Mm-hmm. And let me share those with you.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking you or your audience to think they're great or buy into them, but I'm hoping that they might be a source of inspiration, mm-hmm. a good tool that you can use when you go out and live your dreams, whether they relate to space or not. Frankly, that's up to you. Yeah. All right? Let me share with them. And they're not rocket science. They're very simple. That's the good news. Number 1, whatever you decide to do, always think out of the box and be open for new ideas, new inspiration. It can come at any time. It can come here today, it can come tomorrow, it can come when I head for the airport after this. We don't know. But always have the antennas out and have a bit of surplus mentality to be able to absorb it, because you could walk past the next amazing idea right in front of you. And if you don't have the surplus energy and you're too bogged down by the day-to-day, you won't pick it up. So that's number 1. Think out of the box. Number 2, follow your heart. Follow your passion. Be authentic. And have fun doing it.
I love that.
Yeah.
Follow your passion. Follow your heart.
You make my hair rise now.
be authentic, and have fun doing it. Mark my words, if you use that as fuel on any dream, any mission, anything you want to achieve, no matter how far-fetched and impossible it seems, you will get there. You will get there. It is incredible how those elements of passion and having fun doing what you're doing with great people and doing it away with the passion as a driving force, how you can move mountains. I mean, it is just incredible. And that is the strongest fuel and drive you can add into any equation. You just have to figure out from value number one, when you think out of the box, what is the ideas? Throw up a lot of ideas, and actually now we go into value number 3. Once you've thrown up all those ideas up in the sky, you then pull down some of them, and then you focus and execute. Focus and execute. And therefore, you always have to think about, once you zoom in, you can't do everything at all times. But wherever you decide to pull down, this is really what I'm passionate about. This is really what I want to do. That's great. Go with that. And then stop talking about it. Get on with it. Execute, 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 execute. And that is what makes the difference between, say, me going to space and other people talking about it. But it makes a heck of a difference in reality.
Yeah.
Because I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Watch that space. And the other thing, I remember one thing, when I was sitting on the top of the world at 9,000 meters, just before I was doing my ever skydive, the first ever skydive in the world, I knew that at that point, it was the point of no return. We could not have landed again. I could not have said, "Oh, I didn't feel like it today. Today is not a good day. I think I'll bail. I'll bail out." We couldn't, because we couldn't land. We had too much weight, because our drop zone was at 4,000 meters, which actually is quite interesting, because a lot of other people's teams start at 4,000 meters. Doing the first skydive, you would jump out at 4,000. Yeah. We landed at 4,000.
That's like one thing. When you first said it, I was like, "That's where most people jump from, where you landed."
Yeah, that's where we landed. Okay, so that's an interesting one. This is a matter of perspective and size and height. But when we took off from that drop zone we had created, and we flew up to 9,000, it was genuinely the point of no return, because we could not land with all the people we had on board and the equipment and everything else. We could not land safely at 4,000 meters. We had to jump. And this very little thing reminds me, every time I ever doubt about, I know I took this decision, should I remake it or not do it or whatever, something that a lot of people would probably familiarize themselves with and say, yeah, sometimes, we take a decision, but then we don't follow through on it. No. I always think back at that moment and say, no, it's the point of no return. Once you've taken the decisions, you get on with it, you execute, execute, execute. And that is value number 3. Value number 4, time discipline. So we can have many resources in life. Money, they can come, they can go, you can lose some, whatever. These are resources, and they're helpful, but they can come and go. Time is a funny thing. It always goes. You never get it back.
No.
And the older you get, the more you realize that actually time is, a limited resource, very limited resource. So my advice on that one is to say, okay, look at what is your priorities, what is your time available, and how do you match that? So be conscious about how you allocate your time. I'm not saying necessarily squeeze in as much into your agenda as possible and you'll be an amazingly happy person. I'm not saying that. Some people love that. Some of us, we think is fun and fine. But I'm not saying that's the way forward. Just be conscious about how you use your time, that it matches up with your priorities. Mm-hmm. That's the message.
Yeah.
Number 5, teamwork. 1 + 1 + 1 = 5. Why? Well, because within teams, synergies are created. As a team, we're stronger. When it comes to space, there's not one single person who can do everything.
No.
When we did training in Russia, we need people with political access to the bases. We need doctors. We need astronauts. We need financial sources. We need a whole bunch of people to make all this thing happen. And there's not one person who can do it all. Not one. Impossible. Therefore, you got to work in a team, whether it's regards to your space adventures or relates to business, finance, and otherwise. You have got to work with great teams and enjoy that synergy that's created within teams. So working in a team and working with great talented people, I always say I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I surround myself with very smart people. And that's a clever thing to do. So I can also recommend that. You don't have to be the cleverest. But surrounding yourself with great people and have a great team around to give you leverage, and those synergies adds up to 5, if not more. So try it. So that's value number 5. Value number 6, risk reward. Now, this is one I'm stolen from finance. When you stand in front of making a big decision, always assess what is the maximum risk? What's the maximum downside? If things go wrong, and when it comes to adventure, things can be pretty horrible if they go wrong.
The risk is usually pretty big.
It's pretty big.
That can be expensive.
You're not just losing some money or whatever. You could lose your life, technically. So it's something we do, and we have lost lives, as I've just explained. So it's something we take very seriously. But what's the upside? And does the upside justify taking on that level of risk? Going to space, in my opinion, is exciting and just amazingly fantastic thing to do. So that's what I want to do as my dream. It's not for everybody, and fair enough. But always assess what is the upside versus what is the downside, and then you do the net on it. And some people have small risk budgets. Other people have big risk budgets. I probably have more than the average.
Yeah. At this point in time, we kind of know.
You don't say, Per.
But it's individual assessment anyways. And I'm not telling what budget people should have in terms of their risk budget. But all I'm saying is just make that little calculation and you do very well. And then number 7, which is by far the most important value of the seven Wimmer fundamental values. And that's the following. Whatever you decide to do, always make sure to give back. Always make sure to inspire other people. Because you'll find as you go through an inspirational process, that will spread like rings in the water. And very strangely enough, when you least expect it, it will come back like a boomerang in a very positive manner to you when you least expect it. Just because you did the right thing, you inspired, you gave back. Within Wimmer Space, we team up with various charities. We've worked with a whole bunch of charities over the years, supported them, and therefore gotten leverage to live out that part of the mission into that. And that includes a lot of children's charities. And we also did some work with the homeless. I actually had the privilege or experience in being homeless in Wales.
Okay.
Hadn't been to Wales much, and I was once sleeping on a car park in January in Bridgend in Wales, of all places, with the homeless, just trying it out. It was part of a program we did with Nat Geo. But it was interesting, and I got to meet some fantastic people, honestly, really amazing people, and I also learned a lot personally about homelessness. Mm-hmm. To be honest, I was so naive when it came to homelessness before. I thought homelessness just meant, give them a bottle of water and a bit of food and some money, and then you're relieved of responsibility, and that's it. You've done your little bit. How naive I was. How naive. I mean, I had no clue, to be honest. But having spent a lot of time with homeless people in Wales and realizing what actually matters. And to be honest, yes, it wasn't the water. I mean, they would get that through the local charities and whatever, and they would get a lot of clothes and everything else. So to be honest, there's no point buying them another rucksack or coat or something because they can't move it around. So if they got one, that's all they need, So I was so naive about this thing. But what I realized, what they really needed was empathy and time, where you can actually sit down, talk, listen at eyesight, at eye level, and actually respect them and not treat them like secondary citizens that just needed a couple of quid and then a bit of water and a warm coat, and then we're all done here. Actually sitting down, showing empathy, being at the same level, and just understanding and just spending time. And I realized that was actually so much more important. And whatever water you brought or whatever, that was just the formal excuse to spend some time and show up, as it were, and connect. So anyway, after I had that experience, I didn't quite know how I could help out there, because there was in particular one charity out there called the Wallage that I worked with, and they did a very good job, and they did breakfast run, and they were helping a lot of people. So my frustration was, how can I help? But I realized after a while that there were people living up in the valleys of Bridgend and Wales that couldn't access those services in Bridgend and Cardiff specifically, where the Wallage was operating. Yeah. So at the end of it all, I ended up buying them a bus, which we refitted. So it had a medical facilities, washing facilities, showering, and all that stuff. And today, that Wimmer Wallage bus still roams around the valleys of Wales, up and down, servicing the homeless community. And I think I'm very proud of that. And that's very inspirational. And this is what I'm saying. I'm living out again my dreams, but I try to do my little bit to help out wherever I bump into an issue there where I can make a little difference. And that's why value number 7 is by far the most important.
That's really inspiring.
When you were living with the homeless people in that area in Wales, besides this realization of that homeless people are really in deficit of empathy from everyone else and how you can sort of change your outlook there, how did that impact you going through that experience?
It was quite emotional. Again, when you're face to face with the needs, it just changes. And again, I was so naive going into it.
Because you were like immersed in it, you said.
I was so immersed to it. I mean,
you spent a couple of days
I spent time there. I was even sleeping rough. Eventually, I got my own little, very primitive apartment, dare I say, with no furniture, so I had to figure out what to do. But then it turns out there's another charity out there which actually supply furniture packs. So for very, very little money, they will kit out your flat. So when homeless people get back on the ladder again and maybe get a council house or something, you can call up these wonderful chaps, and they would literally, for very little money, supply you with an entire sofa and bed and everything you need in your house. One phone call. I mean, again, another amazing charity that I got to work with. So it was quite an interesting experience. And when you're face to face with the people who are in need, it's a whole different experience than just writing a check or sitting at a fancy dinner talking about it. It really is. So I encourage everybody to get out there, and you realize it's not just about money. It's not just about giving a water bottle or a warm coat. In fact, often that's actually not so interesting or not so relevant because they may already have it. But there might be other things. So you got to listen. You got to show empathy. You got to understand when you interact with other people. Get inside their brains, connect with their hearts. And when you do that, then you realize how you can actually make an impact, make a difference, when you have that mutual respect. And that I think is a very important lesson when it comes to charity.
It goes back to a little bit what you said before with the resourcefulness, that money comes and goes, but time, that's really finite. And when these people, they realize that you're actually there to give your most precious, your time, and listen to them, that has so much more value for them than getting a little bit of quit, because there is different sources that comes and goes, but people really putting down the time to listen. I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, that makes a big difference for these people.
Exactly. It makes a huge difference. And that's why I'm so grateful for Nat Geo, because they connected the dots. And obviously there was no official excuse to do that, which was their initiative. But it allowed me, sitting otherwise normally in my comfortable office in Mayfair in central London, to connect all the way down to the parking lot, the cold parking lot during the night in Bridgend, Wales, with the homeless people. So I'm very grateful they made that connection, and it certainly educated me tremendously. And I got to meet some amazing people, to be honest.
What drove you to do that in the first place, to spend that time in that situation?
So I always have that good heart with me, I like to think. So when I see there's a good angle, whatever I have to offer and what I can bring to the table can make a difference, then I show up. I try to do what I can within my time limits and resource constraints. I try to do what I can, and I saw that there was an opportunity there to do that and to make a difference and make a sustainable difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you decide, instead of, again, from your office, I'll just mail a check, you said, I'm going to go live in this environment?
Well, that's maybe where the adventure part comes in, because yes, it's one thing writing a check, but I am also an adventurer, and I'm not afraid of being out there at the deep end. And this was certainly a deep end in some regards, but the adventure spirit is very much there. So I'm not afraid. I don't need to stay at the Four Seasons in Bridgend. Not that I think that exists, by the way. But but if you know what I mean, I don't need to stay in a 5-star, whatever. I'm an adventurer, you know. I've lived in the Amazon jungle with the Indians, which, by the way, was another fabulous adventure I did. This may be where the Indiana Jones element of your introduction comes in. That was another fabulous adventure. So I've done that. This was back some years ago. I went into Manaus, actually the capital of the Amazon in Brazil. Actually, this is a very good sort of 007 meet Indiana Jones story, because
let's get into it.
That's what we're here for, apparently.
Yeah, it was actually. I was backpacking through Brazil because I really wanted to discover Brazil, and I was so excited to go into the Amazon because it's one of those very remote places on planet Earth, isn't it? I mean, that is genuinely difficult to access, and where you genuinely have some Indian tribes that I perhaps still hasn't touched humanity outside. And thankfully so, because they'll probably get sick with all our bacterias and everything we bring to the table. So anyway, so I was quite intrigued by that. I've been told that there was a little double-decker ferry, tuk, that was leaving at 7 o'clock one evening, and then you could then stay on board. And then the plan was then for me to have a 2-day journey upriver, up the Solimões. I arrived there, I think it was like 6:30 or something, well ahead of the 7 o'clock departure time in the harbor of Manaus, only to be told that the ferry had left half an hour ago at 6 o'clock because they moved the schedule. I was like, oh no, this is terrible. This is really, I mean, no.
That's wild, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So it was already half an hour further upriver. So, but anyway, so then the James Bond element of it sort of became resourceful, and I saw there was one of these longboats you've probably seen in Asia as well, longboats with a big car engine attached and kind of racing boats,
exactly,
if you like, Amazon style. So I saw there was a guy there, and I don't speak Portuguese, but I speak a bit of Spanish, and by that time I spent enough time in Brazil to be dangerous enough in Portuguese, because with my Spanish as a base and then a little bit of few words on top in Portuguese, that was enough to negotiate. So I negotiated a quite expensive ride with this guy, but he was up for it. And I was like, mate, okay, here's the money. Now chase that ferry, follow that ferry upriver. And he did. So we went speeding all the way up Solimões. And eventually we're catching up with the ferry as we come speeding there. I put my backpack on, and I literally start climbing up the side of the ferry as it still is moving in the river.
No,
so it was
seriously,
absolutely, seriously. I was climbing up, and I was hanging out there, and it was quite exciting, actually, to be honest. And eventually, I just make it up across and get into the cattle section. There were animals, there were cattle, there was sheep. I mean, there was everything on there. It was incredible, quite smelly, actually. But anyway, I made it on, so I caught up eventually. And then I made it up to the second floor where there's a lot of hammocks and people hanging. And then, I mean, you couldn't make this up. I mean, this is truly out of a movie. I then make it up to the second floor. You won't believe what I saw there. It was really, this is really a James Bond moment. I show up, and there were 10 super hot models dancing up there. I mean models. Like, it was just incredible. So we ended up having the most fabulous trip because obviously I had my own little story to tell them, and when that was told and the drinks started flowing, we had a fabulous party all the way up the Amazon River. And it turned out they were just heading out for a photo shoot a little bit further up river. That's why they were there. They were doing a campaign for God knows what brand, but we just so I was very pleased.
What year was this?
This was in 1997. So it's a while back, but it was just you couldn't make it up. So anyway, I made it up, and then I kept sailing for these couple of days, and I made it up to eventually a little town called Tefe, where I got off. And then in Tefe, I asked around, and I was told that because I said, I want to go and see the Indians, I want to live with the Indians in the Amazon. And I was now, at that point, deep into the Amazon, but I was still close to the river.
Yeah.
I then go in and people told me, you got to go and see Joachim. Joachim, he's your guy. He's a medicine man from an Indian tribe, but he lives here in Tefé. It's like, where does Joachim live? Well, it's 2 streets up and to the left. It's like, okay, great. I went to knock on his door. Joachim. It's like, my name is Per. I'm from Denmark. In Portuguese, of course. And I was like, oh, come on in, sit down and whatever. And then we got talking and I told him about my mission. I wanted to go and see the Indians in the Amazon. And it's like, yeah, but we can look into that and let's have a meal and let's talk about it and da-da-da-da. And there's a little bit of financial side to it. We get that sorted out and stuff like that. Anyway, next day, Joachim, myself, and a boatsman, we then went sailing way into the Amazon, like on the small rivers now. And the most miraculous thing was Joachim, he was almost blind. He couldn't see, and he was our guide. He was our guide.
He was going by smell, or
I can't tell.
It also sounds like something from a movie.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's truly movie stuff. I mean, you could not make it up. He was almost blind. He could hardly, he would bump into things all the time because he couldn't see a thing. But he was our guide. And miraculously, he guided the boatsman, who was literally just a boatsman. He was doing what he was being told. And then we made it up through the little rivers and the next little river, and we turned left and we turned right and we turned left. And I was totally lost. I have zero idea where I was. I was literally in his hands. And eventually we made it into this amazing family, living there in the forest as Indian, living off the forest, no clue about money or anything like that, just living off the forest. And we got the huge privilege of staying there. And I so enjoyed it. And I was made in charge of catching piranhas for dinner. So I now know how to catch piranhas. They taught me.
I mean, so do we, but for everybody listening, how do you actually catch piranhas?
So the thing is, you take a little stick or branches and a little string on it, and then you put some bait on it, so like a fishing rod, effectively. And then you got to find the right quiet area where they're likely to be, and then you just keep putting the fishing rod down and up, down and up, down and up. And the thing is, once you get your first bite, then you know dinner is fully covered because they always travel in schools. So once you get the first one, you just keep going up, and then it's like pulling. There's a frenzy, exactly, and then you just take them off the hook, and that's it. But their teeth are so sharp, so you won't be killed by being bitten by one piranha. But the problem is, if you fall into the water and they start nibbling away, it's not particular because their teeth are so sharp. They're really sharp. So
it's almost like Amazon fly fishing, kind of, where you kind of like tease the water to
tease it, exactly,
but with like a chunk of meat instead of like an insect.
Exactly, and then you eventually get it up, and once you've got enough for dinner, then that's it. We're sorted for next day, and that's how they lived. So they would pluck berries and things like that, and live off the forest. The man of the house would go hunting with a spear. So he would go spear hunting and catch small animals and things like that. So that's how we survived, and it was just amazing. And we would sit there and over the fire just talk about life values and stuff like that. And it was just amazing to see because these people clearly were so happy. There was no stress in their life. There was plenty of food in the fridge. The big fridge, the Amazon. So no stress, no nothing to worry about, no bills to pay, no meetings to run to, no nothing. I mean, they were just relaxed and happy and just wonderful people. And contrast that with people I know on Wall Street who are multi-millionaires, who are stressed and depressed and horrible human beings sometimes, and all this sort of thing. It was quite a bit of a wake-up call and a philosophic moment, just saying, money doesn't make you happy. Or let me put it like this, money, you can't buy happiness.
Yeah.
Money is a good tool to execute on certain dreams. Ask Elon Musk about his wild dreams and stuff like that. Without financing, he won't get there. So money is important as a tool, but money must never be a mission objective in its own right. Because if you do that, you'll fail. and you will not become happy. And that was something that dawned upon me when I was sitting down there with them, just seeing how amazingly happy they were with technically nothing, but in reality, everything.
How have you brought that back to Europe with you? That mentality that you sort of like uncovered in that tour, and then you come back into the Wall Streets and you have Wimmer Financial, you have like all sorts of things going on. How do you implement that in this culture?
Yeah, it is a lot harder than it is in the Amazon jungle, to be perfectly honest, because there you're a lot more focused on what really matters, on the family, on survival, and that's it. Whereas you come back into Mayfair again, and there's 1,000 distractions. There's entertainment, there's this, there's that, there's bills, there's flights, there's travel. There's all sorts of things that is competing for your time and your schedule. And some of that sounds great and amazing, and why not? And let's try, and all these sorts of things. But before you know it, suddenly maybe some other things that are important, perhaps more important, end up being squeezed a bit. So it is something that one constantly has to remind oneself about. And I think all of us, I think lots of us would be pleading guilty to that. And it's hard. It's hard. But that's just modern life. And when you're immersed in the middle of it, and in particular when you have demands on business, because it's not a one-way thing, you don't create value and then get paid for whatever value you create without providing some input. So it's not a free trade in that sense. So it does come with responsibilities. So all of that obviously creates demands, and at times there are peak demands, and that can sometimes be quite taxing. So it is something that's very difficult. But I think a lot of us, including myself, learned a lot during COVID. COVID, horrible as it was as a global phenomenon, it did have some amazing positive byproducts that came out of it. And one of the things I remember for me personally going into COVID, I was 110 miles an hour. I was running around, flying around, social events here and there, business events, business dealings, everything. It was like 110 miles an hour. And then suddenly we all stopped. The music stopped. And then we came all back down to planet Earth again and reminded ourselves what is actually important. So during those 2 years of COVID, I actually ended up by accident spending almost 12 months here in Denmark.
Okay.
I flew over for a couple of weeks because it was my niece's birthday. So I came over for that, ended up staying a bit more, and then London shut down again. So I was like, I might as well stay for Christmas. And then London kept being shut down, so I might as well stay. And therefore I ended up creating my own little bubble here of close family.
Yeah.
And I did spend time with my son who lives here, and I went to a lot of his football training, and he had a lot of one-on-one training because that's his passion. Spent a lot of time with family, and I was working a lot less, to be honest. I worked 2/3 of the day. A lot of that was Zoom and emails, but you didn't have all the other stuff in the evenings and conferences and flights and all that sort of time-wasting things. So it was really sort of down to basics, COVID. And it could be nice to have a COVID moment, not a COVID bacteria, but a COVID moment, sort of once every 2 years, perhaps for 3 months, where we just all remind ourselves to go back to basics, back to what really matters, take some time off. There was something beautiful about the byproduct of this awful illness that ended up traveling around the world, where it brought a lot of us back down to earth, which I think is something we ought to be doing. But it's difficult to remember to do it again and again, unfortunately.
Yeah, because then we get into the drive, and now we start to add a little more right foot to the pedal, and sooner or later we're driving 110 again.
110, right? 120.
Exactly.
Arguably we're now at 130 miles an hour at the moment. So, and it just comes incrementally. It sneaks in, and yes, what about this? Let's do that. And now everything is open. You can fly here and there and everywhere. Yeah. So it just sneaks in, and it's so difficult to control. And that's why we need some, let's call it something else than COVID. Let's just call it a little break.
Yeah.
A 3 months break every 2 or 3 years. I would vote for that.
And how, Per, in all of this, with all these adventures, how is this being financed?
A lot of that is through hard work, to be honest. I'm an entrepreneur. I was, in terms of my career, I was lucky to join Goldman at the right time. It was during the dot-com period where things were a bit crazy and money were falling a bit out of trees if you were at the right place. Mind you, it was tough to get in. I had 38 interviews in 3 cities, Boston at first, where I was studying at Harvard, and then I had 2 rounds in London with people over there, and then finally in New York with senior management. And it was literally head of bonds, head of equities, head of international. I mean, it was the head of heads. The only
all
guy,
the big guys.
It was all the big guys. The only one I did not interview with was the CEO of Goldman Sachs worldwide. That was the only one I missed. Everybody else I talked to.
Okay.
So they really took recruiting very seriously, which is also something I've picked up within my companies today. So the way we recruit at our companies today is actually we get the CV in, we bring the person in. We don't do Zooms and stuff. We bring them physically in person, and I get them to meet every single one. I get them to meet every single one of my colleagues. They all have to be thumbs up on that person. It doesn't matter what I think. I'm just one vote, and I think that's a very important cultural thing. It sounds simple, and it sounds a bit cumbersome because if I like the person, why don't we just get on with it and I'm sure it'll fit in. No, it's actually very good to have that kind of consensus into it because you have an immediate cultural buy-in across the board, because if it turns out to be an idiot, then we're all guilty. It's not just me, it was all of us. And also, if somebody doesn't like a person, you don't want to put a bad apple in the mix because it can have a very big cultural impact in a small team. So having that sort of recruitment by consensus, by team, is actually a really critical thing. And therefore having all these interviews, which I had at Goldman, so it's something I learned from them, but we're implementing that today, literally.
How many interviews for me to get hired at the Wimmer Financial now?
You probably have to have 20.
Okay.
And it must be unanimous?
Yeah.
So it's tough to get in. But once you're in, you're in.
Once you're in, you're in, because then you're part of the family. You're not just part of the team. You're part of the family. Culturally.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I remember when I was studying I took some classes at Harvard Business School, HBS. I enjoyed it a lot because I wanted to learn about finance and numbers and business cases and all that stuff. And I also took some of the softer courses. And I thought they were a bit tedious, to be honest. They're the ones about culture and about this business culture and all these things sitting in a circle and singing songs together. I thought, listen.
Me and Travis, we love that.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I did not at that time.
No.
I thought that was a waste of my precious time at Harvard. And I thought, what's the point in that? Fast forward to today, I realized that it is as important as all the hard business stuff. Business and finance in particular is about psychology. If you take my book I put out after the international financial crisis, I think it was in 2011 or something like that, it was called Wall Street, which goes through the ups and downs of psychological markets. Why don't we learn? The dot-com boom and bust, the credit boom and bust. Why don't we, the tulip mania, all these things. Why don't we learn? That book, even though it's got Wall Street as a title, is actually a book about psychology. So anybody can read it, honestly. There happens to be a bit of finance in it, but anybody can understand it very easily. And that's the thing I understood, that when it comes to business and finance, minimum half of that is actually about psychology and the softer things, the culture, when you talk about teams and things like that. The other half, yes, there's a bit of spreadsheets, there's a bit of numbers, and yes, they do need to add up. But to be honest, a lot of people can do that. They can add the numbers, they can put forward the business case. But half of it, if not more, is actually about the people and the culture. So those courses I had about culture at HBS they were actually invaluable, even though I was trashing them at the time. And that's the fact.
When you say that it's about the psychology,
yeah.
Can you just expand on that a little bit more? Do you mean purely culture building, or are there other aspects to it as well? Or
yes, there is. If you are looking to enter into a business transaction and or invest into a company, what are the 3 most things you'll be looking at first before anything else? Well, let me tell you what that is. People, people, and people.
Okay, yeah.
management, management, management. Those are the three first things you look into. And then we can look into the business plan and the market and the opportunity and the numbers and the IRs and all these sort of things. Absolutely, we'll have to do that, due diligence as well, of course. But it's management, management, management.
What are you looking for there? Like when you invest in a company, what are you looking for in that management?
You can have an average management team with a world-class project, and you can almost be sure that they'll mess it up. Or below average or something, they will mess it up. Even though it's a world-class thing that looks amazing on paper and this just looks like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
They'll mess it up. You can have a super highly tuned management team that are just super smart, very pleasant, humble to the task, and they can have an average project for now, and they will make it amazing. They will buy stuff in, they will make that sweat, whatever they have today. They'll raise some more money, they will acquire, they'll develop, they'll build, they'll tweak, they'll change. The quality of the management is so important.
They'll find a way.
And specifically, what do we look into? Again, the passion element is really important. The desire to succeed, the drive, the intellect, super important. The vision, the way they go about it, the way they build up teams, the way they interact with their external companies, whether they're suppliers or customers or whatever, all of those things. But above all is the passion, the drive. If you can see the passion and the drive in a talented person's eyes, they will make it happen. They will go through fire and hell for you as an investor. That is very, very important in the DNA. Obviously, that person can have a great track record, having done it before. That obviously helps. I mean, there are ways to de-risk any kind of business transaction. What have you done before? What's your track record? What's your experience, etc.? And if you go into a new territory, how will you handle it? And what's the business plan? All those things. But they're almost like sort of box-ticking exercises. But the things you can't put your hand on is how that management team reacts in a given new situation. And that's where you need the talent. And that's also why, frankly, sometimes managers are paid very well because they actually create a lot of value. That's capitalism. If they genuinely do, they should also be rewarded because they got to be incentivized.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is when it comes to incentives, perhaps a bit further down the system, financial incentives is one thing, but you must not underestimate the cultural incentives as well. The reward, the clap on the shoulder, the encouragement. Again, half of it is probably non-financial and half of it is financial. So you got to have both. And that's perhaps also something that managers sometimes mistake. But to bet on a management team, track record and passion and drive and energy and desire to succeed, I think are very critical elements.
What's one thing, the most important thing for you when you meet a new hire where you just see it, you're like, I know this is going to be great. They're going to go through the interview. I know that.
So I used to be, when I was at Goldman's, apart from my day job, I was also the recruitment captain for East Coast America. So I would literally travel around to some of the grad schools and pick up graduates there.
Here we go.
And I remember distinctly certain interviews, and I'll answer your question by way of examples, and that will illustrate, well, the answer. So, for instance, there was one interview I had with a very talented guy from Lehman Brothers. He knew it all. He had all the contacts. He had a lot of experience. He had all. But what he also had was a huge degree of arrogance, and because he thought he knew it all. And he did, to be fair to him, at that point in time. But the thing is, business is not static. It's dynamic.
Yeah.
And you got to grow with the task. And somebody who is a bit cocky, a bit arrogant to the task, thinks he or she knows it all. Yes, that person will get up the learning curve fairly quickly, but that person will also plateau quite quickly. And I knew that. We knew that from experience. So we would typically turn down, surprisingly, and obviously this person in particular was like, why? You don't want to hire me? I mean, I am God's gift to earth. I mean, what do you mean? This can't be true. I mean, you're making a mistake there. No, we're not, because we know what we're doing. Take another example. I have interviewed an Olympic swimmer who knew very little about finance. I've also interviewed a violinist who was like top on playing the violin, like really amazing. Like, wow, where you play with this orchestra and that level, and wow, super impressive within music or within swimming. But not knowing so much about finance. But listen, don't worry too much about that. I mean, we all pretend it's very difficult, but it's not. You can pick it up. We can teach it. I mean, finance you can be taught. It's okay. We'll pick it up. You have a basic understanding. That's fine. Those two last profiles, those would be profiles that would have a slow learning curve, so they would slower get up to speed. But they would also have a profile where they would hit the high notes. They would go super far. Why? Because they'll be very humble to the task. They'll always think they're a little bit not achieving enough because we're a bit humble to the task. We don't understand it fully, but we understand a lot of it. But I got to understand more because otherwise I won't be the best.
Yeah.
They would also have the mentality of wanting to be the best because they've already been the best. They know what it takes. They know what it takes to be a top achiever. And those two combinations ends up bringing people up to the sky, to a very high level. And they end up being the ones that in the long run ends up outperforming everybody else because they know what it takes to get to the top. Hard work, focus, dedication, etc. And they're a little bit unsure about themselves within this new field, that they know they got to work extra hard to get there because the others probably know a lot more than I do. And therefore you get an amazing candidate. So those two contrast examples would illustrate the answer to the question.
Yeah.
And therefore I'd rather go for the violinist or the swimmer. And that's kind of what we look for as well today. If we find somebody who's got that profile, who's got that desire, and in general is a nice person. I mean, we don't underestimate the soft side of things, whether being a nice person, whatever you do in your interview when you show up, and if you're arrogant to the first person you meet or the secretary or whatever, that doesn't leave a good impression at all. So be careful, The camera is on the moment you walk in through the door, not just when we start the interview. So that would be good advice to me, to just be humble about the task and portray yourself as a good candidate, a nice person, and somebody who's willing to join in on the mission to get there. And if you then have a track record that is outstanding in something else, we would be very intrigued.
That's interesting. A lot of people listening to this, they might be a first-time entrepreneur who are just getting started, or an entrepreneurial, that they want to aspire to entrepreneurship. What's something that perhaps someone like that doesn't know about what they're getting into that maybe they should know?
Well, first and foremost, I think don't sit and wait for perfect information. I'll take myself as an example. Had I known what I know today, what it would take to start my first company, my merchant bank, when I started up on October 4th, 2007, which, by the way, is no coincidence. Those people who follow space would know that was the 50th anniversary of Sputnik. So obviously it was a great day for launch of a new business. It had to be that day. And all new companies we launched ever since is always on October 4th. That's the day we launched new businesses. Always.
That's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool, actually.
That's just the philosophy.
Very intentional.
That's just the philosophy. But had I had perfect information about how much it takes in terms of all aspects of it, I probably would have waited a few more years. And thanks God I didn't have it. So as an entrepreneur, don't sit and wait for the perfect moment. If you have a dream and you have something that genuinely you think you can make a difference with, and you have enough capital to just get going, then my advice is just get on with it. Make the mistakes, get your scars and make the mistakes and try and correct them, but get on with it.
And be prepared that those mistakes are coming.
And there always is. If you're not making mistakes, then that's a mistake in its own right.
That's true.
If you're not making mistakes, that is a mistake in its own right, because that means you're not pushing the boundaries enough. You're not pushing the boat out far enough. You have got to be willing to make mistakes and learn from them. And if you're too cozy and therefore not bumping into anything, I guarantee you're not aggressive enough. You're not pushing the boat out enough. So you've got to do that. But as a first timer, my advice would be, number one, obviously get the education you need, because education is good in the long run, business school and otherwise, and real life experience from University of Life, as I call it. Those two elements are very important. So having the academic smartness, whatever you've studied, and being street smart and energetic, those two elements combined with a good idea is kind of the key ingredients. The rest you'll figure out as you go along. Don't sit and wait for the perfect situation to emerge, because A, it won't, and B, by the time you have the perfect situation on your side, life would have changed and the opportunity might have gone away.
Execute.
Stop talking about it. Get on with it. So that would be my best advice. Yes, you need the intellectual and academic ballast these days, because life is sophisticated and hard, and it does help when your business get up to a certain level that you have that ballast. Maybe not on day one, but on year 4 or 5. Suddenly you're faced with all sorts of other issues that maybe you haven't learned about, whether it's HR or this, that, the other, that you suddenly need to think about, because your business has now grown to a size where other things matters, and it's good to have that, because at that time you don't have time to become educated. You have to know it before that. But at the same time, don't hold yourself back for too long before you get on with it, because the clock is ticking, and if the opportunity is there, go and seize it.
What have been some of the setbacks that you've had throughout your career, and how did you overcome them? Because you say you started Wimmer Financial in 2007, which is more or less right before the financial crisis in 2008. Talk us through that journey.
Yeah, that was obviously in hindsight a brilliant time to start a business, wasn't it? In finance. 2008, fast forward, spring of 2007, October, starting a financial business. Fast forward, spring of 2008. Bear Stearns, one of the biggest investment banks in the world, are facing the abyss and ends up being saved by being bought out on the cheap by JP Morgan. Whoa. That was less than 6 months in. Fast forward to September, I think it was the 15th of September, there was on a Monday, 2008. Seismic shift like you have never seen before in the world of finance, where Lehman Brothers ends up going bust on that day. Poof. One of the top global investment banks going bust. I mean, it's unheard of. And for good measure, Merrill Lynch, one of the top 3 investment banks in the whole world, ends up being bought by Bank of America. Why? Because otherwise they would have gone bust too. I mean, you couldn't make this up. Tuesday, I think it was the 16th of September, the US government injects $75 billion into AIG, the biggest insurer in America. Why does it do that? Well, because otherwise that would have gone bust too. And that would have meant that your car insurance, your home insurance, and lots of things in American society just wouldn't work at all. So they had to save it. And if they didn't, it would have been catastrophic. It was only little as and this is something I discovered in my research in my book, Wall Street, a little parenthesis, one has to say. Actually, the biggest beneficiary of that $75 billion bailout, in reality, which, by the way, was done by Hank Paulson, who used to be a CEO of Goldman Sachs, by pure chance. The biggest beneficiary of that $75 billion bailout was actually Goldman's, because they had CFDs with AIG for $13 billion, which otherwise would have been worth zero. So Goldman saved the skin by that bailout for $13 billion, which would have been very expensive. But anyway, that's just a little parenthesis. That week was obviously incredible. It was a seismic shift within the world of finance. It was like we've never seen it before. And we saw the stock market hitting down, down, down. I was there. I was less than 12 months old in my new business, trying to sort of get on the runway. And for good measure, my main business at the time, I only had one product. It was secondary placing in junior stocks. It was a transactional business. And guess what? After such a meltdown, transactions stop. So if you're in the transaction business and placement business, that's not a good business to be in. And I remember distinctly thinking there as Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday went on, I was like, wow, this is just horrible, and this is just a meltdown, and this is, the end of it. And for good measure, on that Saturday, that same week, I was scheduled to fly to Nepal to conduct the world's first skydive over Mount Everest. That same week. And I was like, wow, holy cow, I think we better skip that and cancel that, because I'm going to have to manage the fort here at home, because this is too crazy.
This is collapsing now.
This is collapsing. It's the end is near. But as the week went on and we got into sort of Wednesday, Thursday and stuff, I started thinking, no, hold on. Actually, maybe there's opportunity in this. Maybe now is actually the best time to conduct the world's first skydive over Mount Everest, because nothing will happen in the world of finance. True. So I did a 180 on it in that sense, and lo and behold, we flew out there on that Saturday. When it happens, like, time for adventure. Nothing will happen in London and in the world of finance. It will be dead. And maybe it's better when we come back. So we went down, we did our skydive and had the most amazing time. And October 6, 2008, I successfully completed the world's first tandem skydive about Mount Everest. And I was very proud about that. And it was an amazing feat, an amazing adventure. And then right after, I flew back, and I remember landing in Gatwick Airport in London, and I picked up the newspaper, the CDAM, which is a free newspaper in London. And I was kind of hoping now it's back to work. Now I've done my adventure, let's back to work. And the headline of that newspaper was FTSE, which is the UK share index, FTSE in free fall. I was like, whoa, this is continuing. I just did my free fall about Everest, and here FTSE is still in free fall. Oh my God. And
they didn't manage to land at 12,000 feet.
No, they didn't.
They just kept going.
They kept going all the way down to the bottom. So I remember that was truly a challenging time, because at that point there was no light at the end of the tunnel. I could not see any light. It was a dark, dark tunnel. And my company was less than 12 months old. I had some financial resources, but obviously there's a limit to everything. And if this thing went on and on and on and on for God knows how long, I would run out of cash, because I couldn't generate revenues because transactions were not happening. We hadn't diversified the business at this time. We were one product shop. So that was quite scary. You could count the days and the pennies. But what saved me was, and this I think is a lesson learned, was as I did my startup, I had set it up on a low-cost basis. I had deliberately not built a Rolls-Royce. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when people do a new startup, they're a bit insecure about it, and therefore they need to have the fanciest address with the most expensive Rolls-Royce kind of kit, whatever, because they got to show that it's amazing, and even though it was started 3 months ago. And that sometimes is a mistake. Mm-hmm. Because you end up burning capital that you may need to sustain the long run. Because what kills businesses, early businesses, is often not the opportunity to earn money, to make profit. Because quite often entrepreneurs will come up with a great idea because they've done their homework, they've been out there in the trenches, they come up with a good idea. And the business idea often is a great one, and they will make earnings on it. But what often kills businesses is cash flow. What I mean by that is they might see an opportunity to interact with a client, a big client or whatever, but that big client might say, yeah, that sounds good, we'll do it, we'll look into it, it sounds amazing, but let's just think about a couple of months about it, and maybe we'll meet again, and then we'll take a look again, and sounds good and sounds interesting. All the time you're burning cash in the background.
We've been there.
You're burning. So you got to keep your burn low. because otherwise you run out of steam before that big client says, yeah, okay, I'll sign. And even when they sign, there still is a difference to when they pay. Yeah. So what kills businesses is cash flow or lack of cash. And you can achieve that either through two things, either raising capital, but again, then you're depending on external investors, and sometimes they might dry up because now they think it's taking you too long. Or if it's revenue generated, which is the model I did, I just generated enough internal revenue so that we could sort of make it, etc., which has the huge advantage today that I own 100% of my companies. I've not diluted a single share, which is fantastic and delightful.
That's the founder dream.
Yeah.
That's the founder's dream. And if you want to get to that, then keep your cash burn low. That's absolutely critical. And make sure your incentives for your staff is aligned with the business. Those are the two key elements to do it. And then manage the cash flow. Because what kills businesses is the cash flow or lack thereof or delay thereof, as opposed to the great idea and the earnings, which probably will come in time, but you might be bust by that time, at which point it means nothing. So that's my best advice. It is to focus on those opportunities where you can get it, keep your cost low until then, lock in the cash flow, and then slowly but surely build and scale as you can. Some businesses are very capital intensive, so you do need external capital in, and at which point it's a little bit more managing that, and suddenly you got shareholders to manage as well. My advantage today is that I'm the only shareholder, so I can do a 180 tomorrow if I wanted to.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, from a quality of life point of view, having the ability to be master of your own destiny in that sense and being in control is worth a lot more than money, to be honest. So there's also a quality of life element to it, because otherwise you suddenly have so many stakeholders. You have shareholders that has opinions and needs to be
and
agendas and needs to be informed. You have clients, you have internal teams, you have all these sorts of things. It can get a bit complicated at times, and suddenly you find yourself with less ability to maneuver. So if you are in a business where you can generate enough free cash early on, then do so, even if you do it on a shoestring until you get there. If you're in a business where the capital required is so big that you can't afford it, then obviously you got to do it the more classic way, and then you'll just bump up the evaluation and eventually go for a nice exit.
Yeah.
Where did that initial entrepreneurship drive come from? At what point were you like, instead of going back to like a Goldman Sachs, for example, or putting those skills into motion as you have in the past, which I'm sure were also quite lucrative for you, what drove that? I want my own thing and I want to do it my way.
For me personally, I think it was two things. Number one, my dad was an entrepreneur, so obviously I grew up with it. He started literally in a bike shop, repairing bikes.
How much of an influence was that?
No, that was a huge degree of influence. I had a lot of respect for my dad as an entrepreneur. He literally started in a bike shop repairing bikes. There you go. How do you go from there to then? Well, then that company then ended up going into the automotive business, and it became a dealership for General Motors eventually. So suddenly cars were involved, etc. And then he moved up the ranks there, became head of the spare parts department, and then eventually head of sales on the car. And then eventually, when the business wasn't doing so well, he bought it cheaply and then did a massive restructuring and turned it around, and then became one of the most successful GM dealerships in Denmark. So it was a pretty inspiring journey.
Yeah, that's
but I tell you, my dad was also, he could not spend £5. I mean, he everything was on the cheap with him. He was very good generating revenues. He was awful in spending. He could not spend anything. Anything about £5 at the time was expensive, and we'll wait with that one.
Frugal guy.
He was very very cost conscious. So I learned a lot from him, and saw his journey obviously, and that was hugely inspiring. In addition to that, when I was still in some of my last employments, in particular during my time at Man Group, one of the largest hedge funds in the world, so I think they manage more than $100 billion of assets. Today, all my stuff within Wimmer Space was starting to take off entrepreneurially. So whilst it was not technically a business as such, there was obviously the adventures, there was the various trips to space. But as an entrepreneur, I started adding other things into it. I started adding the books into it, which obviously had a degree of income attached to it. I started I started adding presentations into the motivational speaking. My very first one was done at the school with the worst visuals you could ever imagine from Russia, from my training there, which was super badly edited and bad quality of images, whatever, and people just loved it. They thought it was amazing. And then I got approached by somebody who said, can you come and do this corporately for our clients? And we'll pay you. I was like, wow, okay. Yeah, well, I better up my game a little bit in that case, because it was really bad, to be honest. But they still loved it. And then suddenly I saw here was actually an opportunity to go in the speaking circuit and do motivational speaking corporately. So, I mean, now I've done for Sony, for Motorola, HP, Glaxo. I've done some fairly big corporates, and they love it. And the program has gotten a lot better, I have to say. So it was pretty poor in the beginning. So suddenly I could see there was various things I could add into this entrepreneurially. So that started taking its own life, and it got more and more and more, and it just developed more. And suddenly that became so substantial in terms of the time demand, including media interviews and things like that it was difficult to fit into a normal employee schedule. You know, I was off all the time, and sorry, I got to go again. It's like, again? So I realized it was come to a point where I had to slow it down, or I had to really start walking the talk and become a true entrepreneur, pulling the plug, not having that monthly salary to sort of as a cushion, and then actually setting up my own first company, which I did there on October 4th, 2007. And I remember the first month after that, so this was sort of end of October 2007, I was kind of puzzled by the paycheck that never showed up. It was really strange. I was like, where is it now? It usually showed up there and I do all these great things, but now I have to sit and write checks out and spend money and nothing comes in. What happens? So I remember that. But since then, since the lack of that first paycheck, I've never looked back. Yeah. Since then, I've been an entrepreneur, and it's just about revenues and building the business and stuff. I never looked back. So those were the two sources of inspiration. It was Wimmer Space and the activities that just gotten bigger and bigger. And some of those lessons I learned in terms of how to go about doing agreements or deals within that space ended up being hugely helpful in the early days of Wimmer Financial when I set that up, because I'd done it already a little bit before in parallel, even though technically it wasn't a business and I still had a day job, but it just became too big and too substantial because it started spilling into finance and into deals. And I was like, yeah, I got to walk the talk now. So I pulled the plug and then off we go. And after that end of October experience with no paycheck, I've never looked back.
How do you structure your day with so much stuff going on? You have Wimmer Financial, you have the space exploration, adventurous, like all of this. How do you manage that throughout a day? Like, can you talk us through some of the habits that you have to kind of go for the dream?
Yeah, and there's a few other things. I mean, I 18 months ago set up an accounting firm as well. So now I have an accounting firm. We have accounting clients. I put in my own companies to start with, and now we have other external clients as well. So there's that thing going on. We have our family office, which I set up in 2011, where we run our principal investments as well. So obviously got to look after that, even though I've got an excellent CIO who runs a lot of that particular endeavor. And we got an asset management business, which is currently in transition. So, for instance, 5 years ago, what happened is I took a stake in a quant fund, did a turnaround, significant turnaround on that one, where the performance was changed or the strategy was changed substantially. And fast forward, performance is now up 50%, net of 220 since then. And therefore, the business has improved substantially. I've now exited that. And I'm now in the process of setting up a new strategy, which is more equity with a new team coming in. So I got to also negotiate that deal and make sure they're incentivized and everything else. So there's a lot on the plate, just purely on the financial side. And within the merchant banking, our main focus today is real estate development finance. So we finance developers. They will come to us with their projects, typically in UK, Europe, or North America. Minimum deal size is typically 30 million, whatever currency, euros, dollars, sterling. And then they're looking for finance, equity or debt, etc. So there's also a lot of deals. And I still love doing deals, so I can't help myself for being heavily involved in that particular experience because I love it. But all of that, so in any given, and then there's the occasional adventure things, like, or within Wimmer Space, it might be a media interview. Like I said, recently I've done a lot with TRT World in Turkey because of the Turkish astronaut that went up. So I do spend a bit of time on that. Or there's a new documentary we're currently looking into, or there's a new adventure that comes up, such as I had a fabulous adventure just a couple of years ago. One of the things on my bucket list was I wanted to do the true Tom Cruise Top Gun experience for real. It's always been on my bucket list. And lo and behold, just before Top Gun 2 Maverick came out, I got to oblige on my dream, which was fantastic. So somehow I miraculously managed to make it up to a VVIP list within the US Navy. Miraculously made it through security clearance and everything else, so all hunky-dory. And I got to fly into San Diego, which is the home of the US Navy, got the training within that old building where the US Navy was started. So, I mean, it was Top Gun all over the place. It was fabulous. So we got our training there and instructions. And then we got up to the runway, jumped on, got fully kitted up as well with goggles and helmets and everything else, and got on a C-2 Greyhound. And then we flew out into the Pacific and did an arrested landing on the USS Nimitz. Off the Nimitz class. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And so we flew in there, and I remember it distinctly, having, as a future astronaut, being exposed to a lot of G's, landing on an aircraft carrier.
Full brake.
Oh, yeah, because you come in full throttle, because in case you miss the wires, you got to go up again. So you come in pretty hard, and when you then catch the wire, the strain on your body is enormous. So it's a lot of G's to pull. And it shocked me how hard it actually is. I mean, but delightful nevertheless, of course. So we ended up staying there for overnight on the aircraft carrier. I got to hang out with the XO and the CO of the whole carrier. And I was in the control tower. And we sent off the F-18 Hornets one by one. It was pretty rock and roll.
Wow,
to be honest. Yeah, and we even got down on the deck as well. And there was one point I was literally standing 10 meters away from an F-18 and felt the blast when it was taking off. I mean, whoa. And we got to spend time downstairs, which is like a town. I mean, there's 5,000 people there with lots of cafeterias, there's church and synagogues. And I mean, it's a whole community down there that never sees the day of light. It's just incredible. And there was I think it was more than 90 aircrafts on board. I mean, this is enormous, this thing. It's huge. I mean, you don't realize the scale of this thing. So I was so privileged and blessed and happy to experience and then sit down with the sailors and talk about their day-to-day life, and obviously with the CEO, who was a fantastic person, and talked about sort of how it is going into battle and everything else, and yet next day he would do the sorties and everything. It was awesome. And then obviously when we got to leave eventually, we got hooked up with a catapult, and we got catapulted out of the deck, which was amazing. So, and again, same thing, enormous amount of G's, like serious G's in a very short period of time. So that was an incredible adventure and a real true Top Gun experience. And fast forward a couple of months later, Tom Cruise came out with Maverick. I was all set for that one.
And you were like,
I got you, man. He's go Tom.
That's amazing.
So that was amazing. So sometimes if I can squeeze in these adventures, great. But if not, my day-to-day would be, I don't really make the distinction. I just fill in the gaps. I've got a fantastic team. They know what they're doing. They're doing a great job. But I just plug in the holes. So if I need to help with a deal, I'll do that. If I need to help with a new client on the accounting side, I'll do that. If there's a media interview, it's typically me who's doing it, although my colleagues are increasingly doing some of that as well. So it depends. So my any given day in the office, so to speak, would be very different with elements from all these various activities and companies, etc. But I frankly, for me, it's just another day in the office, and I just take them the 10 o'clock and the 11 o'clock and the 12 o'clock and the 1 o'clock, etc. So it doesn't really make a big difference because for me, it's all part of that universe or the Wimmer sphere, and I just do what I like doing and live out my dreams every day.
That's awesome. I want to piggyback off Mikkel's question a little bit there too, and just talk a little bit about your own personal development and personal growth, and like that journey that you've taken, because the man you are today, you have some skills, some growth you've experienced over the last years that you wouldn't have had at year 18, for example. And I'm curious, how have you approached personal growth? Like what approach do you take to that? And are you like, for example, reading, talking to mentors, surrounding yourself with certain types of people, and then even down to, are you into any of the like biohacking or physical training, meditation, anything like that as well to keep yourself on top?
Sadly, I don't have time to read a lot these days. So the only time I really read nowadays is when I'm writing a new book and I'm doing some research. I just don't have the time. I wish I had, and I always love reading. And when and if one day I retire, I'll obviously catch up on the reading. But on the other hand, my advantage was I read a lot when I was younger. I've got the 4 master degrees, so I did study a lot. And that's the good news, is I have a lot of ballast from there. But I wish I had more time to read, but sadly I don't. So I wait for the movie to come out, and hopefully that'll be a nice an hour and a half summary. But also importantly, I do interact with other people, and we share ideas, and if you are with talented people, you learn every day. I mean, every day I go to the office and I learn new things. I share some of my story, but I also get exposed to other great entrepreneurs. And so I learn every day, like real time. And I think there's a lot you can learn from reading books and stuff, but there's also a lot you can learn from just doing it. And in particular, when you've got the bases covered, you also just got to get on with it.
Yeah.
I mean, then
when you talked about the school of life, Mikkel and I, we sometimes call it the real life MBA. Like
yes.
when we're learning by doing.
Absolutely. I call it University of Life, but it's real life MBA. It's what it is. But it's probably broader than just the MBA side of things. It is probably University of Life, because a lot of it is human interactions and stuff like that. So it's not just a spreadsheet. It's not just a business model and what DD questions are you going to ask. It's actually University of Life. It's broader than that. It's all the human interactions. It's all the softy stuff as well, not to be underestimated. So, but yeah, just doing it, you learn a lot. Make the mistakes, get the scars, back on the horse. That's it. Keep making mistakes, because if you're not pushing the boat enough. So that's what I highly recommend. In terms of on the physical side, I do believe there's a strong correlation, interaction between your mental state, your physical state, what you eat. So food, physical exercise, rest is very important. And let me just say that again, because it is really important. Getting the right amount of sleep every day and just being able to switch off for those 6, 7, 8 hours is super important. Because if your mind doesn't and your body doesn't get to completely switch off, you end up burning yourself out too much. So rest is important. I do sleep a bit on the weekends just to catch up, and it is important. You gotta respect that for your body. Exercise, whatever you do. I mean, this morning I was out running in Copenhagen. I did my jogging. I feel great today. I feel wonderful. And whatever you do, go to the fitness or whatever, just do something so that your body is physically active and not sort of becoming more and more veggie. I think that's very important. And then food, your food intake. I mean, whatever you eat becomes part of your body. Some goes out again, I grant you that, but some of it stays. So, and I'm not saying you should eat religiously healthy, but just eat sensibly. Eat decent food and sure, sometimes have a little bit too much alcohol and a little bit too much good sweet stuff. That's okay. But just on average, just eat healthy. Lots of veg with your steak or whatever. It's okay. But just eat good and healthy and sensible, because it makes your body in a better state. And it does impact on your mindset as well. So if you have good rest, good food, good exercise, you are very advanced in terms of just your well-being and feeling good. But it's up to you how that translates. Whether that translates into yoga, because you need to have your Zen moment or whatever. I get very stressed if I were to do yoga.
Don't hear that every day.
That would be my most stressful experience, because it's like, what's going on? Let's go. And this is not moving fast enough. But other people have the complete opposite experience. They just enjoy it and they get their Zen moment. Whatever it is, you find out what works for you, but have those 3 elements in there. It's super important as a human, but also as a performing business person.
That's great. And I guess we know for you to get your Zen moment, that's at 80,000 feet at Mach 3.
That is very zen.
Pass the yoga, we'll take the fighter jet, we'll take the MiG up to the stratosphere.
I have one last question that I'm sitting with, and there's something that you said also with the people that inspired you, and especially Richard Branson. What's one advice that he's given you that you kind of always remember?
Richard has always lived out his dreams, no matter how difficult they looked. I mean, for instance, when he looked to buy Necker Island, famously had, I think, $100,000 available, and the price was into the millions. And he made them a cheeky bet, and obviously they rejected it. But funny enough, they called him back later, some years later, when suddenly they wanted to sell it, and he picked it up for very little. He got it his way in that sense. So sometimes you just gotta go for what you want, live out your dreams. Richard has certainly done it with a good heart. So I think he's very inspirational in many ways. And I also think sometimes when he gets criticisms in the press, for whatever reason, I think a lot of it is sometimes very unfair, because he genuinely has a very good heart, and he's a great entrepreneur. And then obviously he's a great adventurer, and he's the provider of my rocket ship. So please keep that dream alive and keep going. That is hugely important. And he's a friend. I have a lot of respect for him. And incidentally, the time I spent on Necker was also eventually what became the source of inspiration for me buying my own private island. I talked to Richard about the pros and cons of owning an island. And there's a lot of cons.
Yeah,
Let's be real. There's a lot of cost. It's cumbersome, and it's this, is that, the other. So I learned a lot of that from Richard. And I just had this sort of like potential idea that one day it would be nice to own one. But then during COVID, I was sitting in the summer house with my mom, and we were looking up the sky. And you remember there are not that many planes flying around during the COVID times. And suddenly we spotted an airline that was flying. So we looked up on our flight tracker. Where is it going to? It was heading for Finland. And then I saw on my flight tracker there was a helicopter as well, heading down to a private island near our summer house. And then I just Googled for the fun of it, who owns private islands in Denmark? Turns out there is 32 private islands, and Denmark has about 400 islands in total, but most of them are state-owned or owned by lots of people, but 32 private ones. And it turned out one was for sale. So I phoned up the real estate agent the next day and said, what's the story? Where are we on this one? And he was like, yeah, well, it's still available and stuff. And I was like, well, can I see it? And it's not like you need to ask the real estate agent to bring the keys or something. I mean, there's a little bit more logistics involved. But anyway, he phoned up next Thursday and said that the owner could take me down there. So I went down, took a look at it, and I instantly loved it. I was like, this is fantastic. And here's actually an opportunity to live out another little dream of mine that probably was induced by Richard and my time on Necker. So I made them an offer which was below the asking price. And I said, well, you talk about it, you figure it out between you. It was the son and the mom, and they needed to call the sister as well. So I said, well, I'll just go for a little walk and you let me know your answer afterwards. And they were shocked because they were used to having people visiting and then they'll come back to you next week or 3 weeks out. They were not used to this kind of bidding directly and what do you think, and transactional.
Yeah.
So I said, well, you talk amongst yourself. I go for a little walk around the island. I'll come back. You let me know. And I did. And they came back. And then they came back with a counter offer, which was a little bit above my offer. And I said, yep, that's fine. I accept it. We shook hands, took a picture, sealed the deal, had a cup of coffee, and let the lawyers to sort out the rest. That was it. That was story, and now that's Wimmer Island, wimmerisland.com.
Super cool.
Yeah.
One question that I have, because I think a lot of people at some point, especially like from kids, even through, it must be through your whole life, dream about what it must be like going to space. And you're one of the few people actually executing on that. And within a couple of years, you'll have your time to be in space. Why space?
Space is the 21st century frontier for adventurers. The world is kind of discovered, more or less. Wherever you show up in the outskirts of wherever is very exciting, there's usually a Coca-Cola dispenser sitting. Somebody's been there before. No offense. I mean, a little bit flippantly, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of exciting things. And there are certainly some adventures I'd love to do on planet Earth still. Who knows? There'll be other things that comes up for sure. But having said that, planet Earth, certainly on the surface, is quite well discovered as an adventure today. Yes, you can go down to the sea and go deep sea diving and stuff, and certainly that's very uncharted territory for most people. But space is also the same thing. So that is truly the frontier of an adventure of the 21st century. Less than 700 people have ever been into space. That's nothing. Wow. Less than 700 ever been into space. We got to change that. And I'm planning to change that. And I'm going up myself, changing that at least by one number. But my hope is, by doing so and doing that with my fellow astronauts, that our capital contribution to those businesses would then allow the cost eventually to come down, and therefore more people having the opportunity for cheaper prices to go into space and enjoy that amazing experience. I think it's an enriching experience. And it's also an experience, I think, that a lot of astronauts I've talked to, they come back with what we call the overview effect. And the overview effect, what is that? That means that you see the bigger picture of life, and in particular on planet Earth. So a lot of them come back with a lot more consciousness about environmental protection, impact, climate change, etc., because they realize how fragile this ecosystem we have and how unique planet Earth is compared to all the other planets. You know, they're cold, hot, cold. They're very unpleasant places to be. Whereas planet Earth has got lots of water, it's got temperatures that doesn't fluctuate too much, and it's got life. So it is really precious and special. So this overview effect a lot of astronauts come back with is hugely important. And I've often said that I think we ought to spend some tax dollars sending lots of politicians into space globally, because not only would they understand the environmental matter much, much better and how precious planet Earth is, but also when it comes to on planet Earth, we have wars. You know, even today, we have lots of wars going on in the world today. We're fighting each other culturally and everything else. In space, we all collaborate because we have to. Even today, you have on the ISS, you have Russians, Americans, you have people from everywhere, Japanese, everything. We all have to collaborate. So in space, we seem to have a much better camaraderie, a much better respect for other people. So space has a lot to offer humanity. We just need to realize it, and more people need to have this overview effect. And I think by sending more people up there, it will grow from bottom up, the grassroots eventually. In addition to the fact that obviously we're going to send more kit up there, that there's a lot more launchers being built, not just, you know, old SpaceX Falcon 9s and Starships and stuff. There's a lot more going on, super exciting. In Europe, we have a company called ISAR that's looking to build some new launch rockets, which I think has got a lot of potential. In America, we're currently working with a company called Voyager Space, which is supplying the Bishop airlocks to the ISS today. But they also got plans of building a new space station potentially, which I think is fabulous. I mean, that opens up new possibilities to do more biotech trials up there where the crystals can be perfect because they are in zero gravity or microgravity. So there's a lot of benefits from space by doing these trials up there, telecommunications, bring down cost of communications, bringing internet to very remote places like Starlink is doing and other providers. So you have a lot of stuff that makes space very exciting. But as an adventure of the 21st century, that's where the frontier is. That is the new frontier. And that's where we got to push. But there's also a strong economic incentive and a human side benefit incentive to actually get up there, put more stuff up there. And that's why I'm doing it.
Per, if you had 30 seconds in that rocket and you know, okay, it's over now, you're getting all the red coats on the computer, and you had the opportunity to talk to the planet, everybody's listening now, you have 30 seconds, what would you tell us down here?
I would quickly share my 7 fundamental values, which I shared with you a minute ago.
Yeah.
I would also encourage you to live out your dreams, whatever your dreams are, with your family, with your friends, with your near circle. But importantly, live out your dreams and focus on what is important to you, and make the world a better place, and above all, protect this planet, because we know how fragile it is and how special it is. So you've got to protect it. And I'm not sure that the plan B on flying to Mars necessarily will save us, because unfortunately Mars used to be a bit more like planet Earth and less what it is today. And I'm not sure that's necessary. So I think we got to stick with plan A and save the planet environmentally and otherwise. And then I also would say, may the mission continue. If my mission is about to end, do not stop. Keep going. More space, more people up there. It creates value. It's a great experience for everybody, and it creates more cohesion. At Astra, see you in space.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Per, we are almost out of time. So could I ask you just in like 1 to 2 minutes? I'm just so curious. What in the next 10 years and maybe in the next 100 years, what do you think we'll see as far as space tourism and how much humanity will be in that what is now a frontier, and how do you see that very briefly?
So within space tourism, within the next 10 years, you will definitely see a lot more rockets going up and down, and there'll be some going to suborbital, i.e. lower Earth orbit, and there'll be others going further out. You would also see at least one, if not several, privately funded, privately built space stations where you can go and stay in a hotel up there within 10 years, for sure. And the first one will probably be a Hilton hotel. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
I'm not joking.
Wow.
This is very concrete stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
There will be a lot more people going up and down, wanting to experience it, wanting to stay there. There'll be commercial incentives to do all these pharmaceutical trials and everything else. And that's beyond doubt. The bigger question is then, what happens beyond that? What about the moon? There's a lot of talk about these days, what can you do on the moon? Who owns the moon? And I mean, there's the International Space Treaty, which regulates a lot of that. You can't put nuclear weapons up there, and nobody owns the moon and things like that. But there are plans on certain parts of the world of doing just that, putting nuclear up there, not weapons, but power generation and stuff, and using the moon as a launch pad into deeper space. So I think the bigger question is going to be what happens with the moon, Mars, and beyond, because that has got to be the next we're looking at. So my question is not, what about the next 10 years of space tourism? I mean, that's in the bag already. That's happening as we speak today, including hotels in space, flying up there, and there will be, like any other enterprises, there will be the budget rocket ship, there will be the first class experience. You will have the whole pamphlet of what you're used to on planet Earth in that sense. Watch my words. That is in the bag today. My question is more what's going to happen beyond that. And the moon has got to be the next target, and getting up there, which technically is feasible. It is still a little bit prohibitive, expensive. For the ultra rich, and there is a Japanese guy, as you know, that famously has signed up with SpaceX to do a fly around the moon, not to land on the moon, but fly around. So we know that will technically be feasible within our lifetime. And eventually somebody would want privately to put his feet on the moon. So there's a lot coming, and it's super exciting. A lot of private capital rolling into space. I mean, last year I think it was about $15 billion of private capital, in addition to NASA's budget of $25 billion. That capital can really achieve a lot of things, and a lot is in motion, and few people are fully aware of what is actually going on at the moment. But it is an exciting journey. It is as exciting as it was during our heroes' time, during the Apollo era, when Apollo 11 went up and the subsequent rockets, and when the 12 moonwalkers did their amazing feat of walking on the moon for the first time. This is equally exciting, and this is just going to be the next level up. So after a little bit of a hiatus, we're now truly ready for heading for the stars, and I want to be a little bit part of that journey.
That's so cool. Then thank you for sharing that with us. And the last thing we'd like to do with you today is we have a little segment where we have some questions in the jar that are just a bit more broad and thought-provoking in some way. And we'll just pick one sort of at random here and see what we get.
Okay.
What would you do if it was your last day on Earth? How would you spend the day? Like, how would you spend that day?
If tomorrow was my last day on Earth, I would spend that with my family and just enjoy the quality time, literally. Maybe going to the summer house and just relaxing, talking, and just enjoying the quality of life. Yeah, spending my last minutes and hours with them.
We were wondering if you were on the way with a rocket or something like that.
Then that would not be possible. I would phone them. I would phone my family in that case, tell them the sad news that this might be the last phone call. But I'd also tell them that don't be sad. I have lived 3 lives already. I have traveled to almost half of the world's countries on Earth. I have lived out my dreams as much as I could as an adventurer, as an entrepreneur. I am now flying into space. I'm living out my dreams. I'm going out with a big bang, happy. So please don't worry. Just be happy on my behalf. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful family.
Really inspirational. Thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
That was a really touching note to sort of end on there. I know for me, like some takeaways I've gotten from this conversation have also been, I mean, it really actually touched me in quite a long time ago at the beginning of the conversation when you talked about sitting across from that little girl near Mount Everest in that orphanage and sharing your mutual dreams with each other and just that feeling of giving back. And I'm sure when people hear that part of the show, like everyone's going to go out and volunteer and do something on that day because like you just have to after hearing that.
I hope so.
And also just your experience in the Amazon as well with how happy those people were without any stress that we put on ourselves today, that we choose to put on ourselves essentially, and how to just slow down and kind of take that, like if we're calling it the COVID moment for yourself. And of course the 7 values as well.
Yeah, for sure. The 7 values. And I also got a little teary when you talked about the little girl. And I think that is one of my dreams on that note is giving back to dogs, like stray dogs, having a big ranch and then rescuing dogs. And then, giving back. That's also one of our fundamental values. So thank you for sharing that.
Please continue to do so. And also your audience. I hope this has been a small source of inspiration. If we all make a little difference in our local communities, the world will be a much, much better place. So get on with it.
Yeah, that's definitely brilliant. Per, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure and best of luck to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Growing Forward podcast with your hosts, Mick and Trav. Join us next time for part 2 of this incredible story.